Are you scared of sewing with zippers? Don't be. Why don't you give them a try with one of these beginner-friendly zippered pouches? The outer fabric that I'm using is from IKEA. I like to use fabrics that have a weight between 150 and 250 GSM. And the lining is made with an old toile, which I made from unbleached cotton. Make sure that it's thinner than the outer fabric. The length of the zipper will determine the width of this bag, and you'll need either a nylon or metal zipper. For this tutorial, I'm using a 15 centimeter zipper measured from glider to stop. Here I'm using the zipper as a guide to the width of the zipper pouch. To determine the height, I took the measurements of the width and deducted 2.5 centimeters, which is 1 inch. So it's 17 centimeters, and I'll put the inches on the screen. Now you want to cut out 2 pieces of fabric for the outer, and the lining you also need 2 pieces. After trimming the fluff of the outer pieces, I'm just using the outer fabric to cut the lining. It works really well because the fabric is sticking onto the lining fabric and doesn't shift. Before I attach the zipper, I'll fold over the ends at a 90-degree angle and stitch by hand or by machine. If you stay close to the edge of the zipper, you won't see it in the finished pouch. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just functional. Folding over the zipper ends like this, it prevents bulk and dimples in the top corners of the pouch. Then you'll need to find the center of the fabric and the center of the zipper. Align the zipper along the edge of the fabric, and the zipper teeth should face the right side of the outer fabric. I'm switching to a zipper foot, and then I'll stitch at about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. This step is just to secure the zipper to the outer fabric and make the next step easier. Now, it doesn't have to be close to the zipper or even a straight line, because this is within the seam allowance and you won't see it in the final pouch. As I get closer to the zipper slider, I move it past the sewing needle. Make sure your needle is down when you do it so you stay in place. After sewing the zipper to one side of the bag, we're going to add the lining. We're going to align the lining to the same edge and to the side of the outer fabric, Now, if your fabric has an obvious right side, then you want to make sure that the print or the right side of your fabric is facing the back of the zipper, and the right side of your fabric is facing the right side of the outer fabric. Now we're going to sew a line of stitches from edge to edge and close to the zipper teeth. So if you haven't already changed to a zipper foot, now is the time to do so. Now, as the zipper starts about 2 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch away from the edge, I take a moment to feel where the teeth are positioned and how I want to align the presser foot and what needle position I want to use. Now the goal is not to sew as close to the zipper teeth as possible. I actually want the zipper tape exposed, but I want to find a nice middle ground. If you are in doubt of where to sew, you can always sew a little bit closer to the edge of the fabric and the zipper tape, the outer edge, and then sew another line of stitches closer to the zipper teeth. You won't see the first line of stitches, and that way you can test it out a little bit. As you get closer to the zipper, keep the needle in the fabric and move the slider out of the way. If you don't move the slider, it will sort of press your presser foot out of the way and you will get a really wonky stitch line. Before you can top stitch, we're going to fold the lining out of the way and press the outer fabric towards the seam allowance. For the top stitching, we want to stay close to the folded edge of the outer fabric. And we're going to start just at the start of the zipper tape all the way till the end of the zipper tape. So you're not sewing from edge of the outer fabric to the other edge of the outer fabric. This will help keep the top corners less bulky and will also help prevent the dimples in the top corners. Now we're going to repeat the steps for the other side of the zipper. To align the fabric for the outer of the pouch, I won't bother to find the center like I did in the beginning. I'll just align it to the edge of the zipper tape and the sides of the fabric that's already sewn on. You can use Wonder Tape, a few hand basting stitches to keep the zipper in place. I'm just going to use some pins, but do whatever works for you. I'm going to attach the lining the same way as I did the first time, and I'll just show you how it all looks when everything's pinned together. And before you start sewing, you want to make sure that you use the same settings as you did before. like needle position and how you align the presser foot and the project, because this will affect the look of how the finished pouch is, and you want it to be symmetric. Once you get close to the zipper, make sure you leave the needle in the fabric as you push the slider out of the way. Next we're going to top stitch the outer of the bag. To do that, before you top stitch, make sure to fold the lining out of the way and press the outer fabric onto the seam allowance. Then stitch from the end of the zipper to the other end of the zipper only. After pressing, we're going to fold the right sides of the outer fabric against each other and also the right sides of the lining. Now, for my lining, you can't really see it, but if you have an obvious print or something, they should be together. I like to add a few pins at the corners. Also, make sure you open the zipper. Honestly, I tend to forget this step. You will be able to open the zipper otherwise, but it's just fiddly and this is so much easier. You'll need it to turn the bag right side out after sewing. So you want to pay special attention to where the lining and the outer fabric meet. I like to finger press the seams open and then pin. I tend to check and double check if they are matching up. And use a couple of pins to make sure that the area is secure. I'm going to mark the bottom of the lining where I will leave a gap in the sewing, because that's how I will be able to turn the bag right side out later on. I'm going to start sewing right next to the zipper, and as you can see, I'm still using a zipper foot. That way I can get close to the bulky area that the zipper is creating. Then I'm going to sew all the way around. I'm not super precise when it comes to the seam allowance. There's about 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch next to the end of the zipper tape, and then I taper down to about 1 centimeter at the bottom, and I try to sew as straight as I can, and in general it turns out okay. If you need a little bit more guidance in this, go ahead and use a marker or a pencil to draw in those seam allowances. Now I'm starting and stopping here, and then what I do is I dial up the stitch length. I use more of a basing stitch, so probably around 4 to 5 millimeters. And start and stop again, and then go back to the 2.5 millimeter stitch length that I was sewing with before. Now I do that because then I can press open the bottom where I want to turn the bag later, and then I have a couple of crisp fold lines that I can use when I close the bag, but you'll see later on how that works. I tend to wait fairly long before I remove the pins, because then there's less chance of the fabric shifting and the side seams being sort of offset. I'll use my fingers to press some creases into the fabric at the bottom. Then I'm going to snip off the corners, and then I'm going to use a seam ripper to open up the bag so I can turn it. First, I'm going to use my hands to poke out the points, and then I'm going to use a bamboo point turner to get them out even further. If that's still not enough, you can also use a pin to do a little bit more detailed poking. I'm not just using the bamboo point turner for the corners, I'm also using it for the intersection of the lining and the outer fabric. That way I can poke out the top corners and sort of press the lining and seams open that are on the inside. After checking that the bag looks good and there are no puckers or little pleats in my sewing on the outside, I'm going to reduce the last of the bulk. Turn it inside out again and then remove as much bulk as I can next to the zipper ends, trim off the folded over zipper tape, and then I'm ready to turn the bag one final time before I close it. And I do have to poke out some bits again, and taking the time in this step will really make a difference in the final look of the bag. To get a really nice crisp edge all around the pouch, I'm going to roll the seam between my fingers and then press. To close the lining and finish the bag, I'm going to fold in the raw edges on the creases that I made previously, give it a final press, and then stitch over the edge of the folded in fabric. To sew close to the edge of the fabric, I'm going to switch back to my normal presser foot. After folding the lining back into the bag and giving it a final press, it's now ready to use.